I am Julian, and I am 28 years old. For 18 agonizing, suffocating years, my parents turned a completely blind eye while my older brother made my daily life a living, breathing nightmare. And when I finally packed my meager belongings into a single duffel bag and escaped into the dead of night on my 18th birthday, they did not even bother to make a single phone call to see if I had survived the winter. 6 years of absolute, deafening silence followed. Then, out of nowhere, they managed to track me down. While I was standing in the pristine, sunlit glass lobby of my workplace, my mother marched right past the security desk, pointed her trembling, manicured finger directly at my chest, and screamed at the top of her lungs, "You owe this family your salary and your life, you ungrateful brat." They had shown up with the explicit, malicious goal of humiliating me in front of 50 employees and a sleazy lawyer they had dragged along to threaten me with a ridiculous lawsuit. But there was one massive, life-altering detail they did not know. They thought they were cornering a desperate, mid-level office drone to squeeze out a few bucks to save my brother from a jail cell. They had absolutely no idea that I actually owned the entire 10-story building we were standing in. And right now, as I speak to you, they are literally begging on their hands and knees to avoid total financial ruin. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I brought their toxic empire crashing down to the ground, hit that like button if you firmly believe in justice and holding manipulative people accountable for their actions. And please, do not forget to let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I sit down and read every single one of your messages. Now, let us go back to where this entire nightmare began. Growing up, my family dynamic was not just complicated or slightly dysfunctional. It was a rigorous, daily masterclass in psychological conditioning. I always felt like the invisible kid in my own home, a background extra in a movie where my older brother, Preston, was the undisputed tyrannical star. Preston was diagnosed with severe ADHD when he was very young. Today, as a grown adult navigating the corporate world, I fully understand the complex challenges that come with neurodivergence. I have colleagues and friends who manage it beautifully. But in my house, Preston's diagnosis was never treated as a medical condition to manage, work through, or medicate properly. It was aggressively wielded by my parents as a golden shield, an absolute, unquestionable excuse for any horrific behavior he chose to dish out on any given day. Every waking moment of my childhood revolved around accommodating his wildly swinging moods, his explosive outbursts, and his relentless demands. From the very day my mother brought me home from the hospital wrapped in a blue blanket, Preston made his stance incredibly clear. He was 5 years old at the time, and instead of the typical fleeting sibling jealousy you might expect from a toddler adjusting to a new baby, he exhibited pure, unadulterated hostility. My grandma Evelyn later told me chilling stories of how he would actively try to tip over my crib when the adults turned their backs, or how he would throw heavy, solid wooden blocks directly at my fragile head while I was sleeping. When my parents caught him in the act, there was absolutely no discipline. There was no timeout, no stern talking to. My mother would simply scoop him up, kiss his forehead, stroke his hair, and say, "Oh, Preston does not mean it. He is just overwhelmed by the new baby and all the noise in the house." That single, enabling sentence became the suffocating soundtrack of my entire life. As I grew older and learned to walk and talk, the hostility did not fade. It escalated into a daily, grueling routine of physical and emotional bullying. If I was quietly reading a library book in the corner of the living room, completely minding my own business, Preston would storm over, snatch it from my hands, and rip the pages down the middle just to watch my face crumble into despair. If I spent 3 hours carefully building a castle out of Legos on the living room rug, he would deliberately walk across the room and stomp it into hundreds of sharp plastic pieces, laughing as I scrambled to save my work. It was as if my simple existence, my quiet ability to find joy in small things, enraged him on a molecular level. Birthdays in our house were the absolute worst. You know how birthdays are supposed to be that one magical day of the year where a kid gets to feel special, loved, and celebrated? That concept simply did not exist for me. Preston made sure of that. Every single year, without fail, he would orchestrate a massive, earth-shattering meltdown right as the cake was brought out to the table. My 10th birthday is burned into the deepest, darkest part of my memory. My grandparents had bought me a beautiful, expensive chocolate cake from a real bakery downtown. The candles were lit, casting a warm, flickering glow across the dining room. My 3 school friends were standing around the dining table, singing "Happy Birthday" with genuine smiles on their faces. I remember feeling, for just one fleeting second, like a normal kid. Suddenly, Preston stomped into the room, his face a mask of pure resentment. He walked right up to the head of the table, grabbed the heavy cake with his bare hands, and hurled it directly at my chest. The impact knocked the wind out of me. It ruined my favorite shirt and sent heavy chocolate frosting splattering across the pristine white walls and the expensive hardwood floor. I stood there, utterly humiliated, the hot tears welling in my eyes as my friends stared in absolute, paralyzing shock. Instead of reprimanding the teenager who had just assaulted a 10-year-old in front of guests, my father marched over, grabbed my upper arm with a grip tight enough to leave a deep purple bruise for a week, and dragged me roughly into the kitchen out of sight. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, and hissed, "Why do you always have to provoke him? You know how your brother gets when there is too much attention on you. Stop crying, wipe your face, and go upstairs to change your shirt before you embarrass this family any further." I walked back out to the dining room, my chest heaving with silent sobs. My mother was sitting on the floor, cradling a sobbing Preston in her arms, feeding him vanilla ice cream from a carton to calm his nerves, completely ignoring the chocolate mess dripping down the wall and the fact that my friends were awkwardly asking their parents to pick them up early. I walked upstairs alone, sitting on the edge of my bed, wiping sticky chocolate off my face with a wet washcloth. Nobody came up to check on me. Nobody brought me a slice of whatever was left of the cake. I spent my 10th birthday staring at the wall. I learned very early on to keep my head down, my mouth shut, and my presence minimal. I became the perfect, quiet, low-maintenance child. I mistakenly believed that if I caused absolutely zero problems, if I got straight A's on every single report card, if I kept my room spotless and never asked for toys, clothes, or money for field trips, my parents would finally notice me. I thought they would eventually reward my flawless behavior with the love, validation, and basic protection I so desperately craved. But being the good kid did not bring me love. It just made me completely invisible. The bullying only grew more violent as Preston hit his teenage years and grew taller and heavier. He pushed me down the carpeted stairs, claiming I had tripped. He bit my arm hard enough to leave deep, bleeding teeth marks when I refused to change the television channel. Every single time I showed my parents the bruises, cuts, and scrapes, they brushed it off with breathtaking casualness. "He is just being a rough big brother," my dad would say, not even bothering to look up from his newspaper. "Boys will be boys. You will understand when you have your own kids." They demanded infinite saintly patience from me, but never demanded a single ounce of self-control or accountability from him. I spent countless nights staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars pasted on my bedroom ceiling, wondering if I was the broken one. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was just a terrible, unlovable son who deserved to be a punching bag. I did not realize then that the real monsters in that house were not just the ones throwing the punches. The real monsters were the ones watching it happen from the comfort of the living room couch, sipping their coffee, and handing the bully a towel to wipe off the sweat. I thought I could just survive the next few years hiding in the shadows. I thought that keeping the peace and staying out of Preston's line of sight would magically keep me safe. I thought the absolute worst thing they could do to me was simply ignore my existence. I was so incredibly wrong, and the dark storm brewing on the horizon was about to rip my entire reality apart. When I was 13 years old, I hit a massive emotional breaking point. I was completely exhausted from sharing oxygen with a brother who treated me like moving target practice, and parents who treated me like a severe inconvenience. For 10 grueling months, I saved every single penny of my meager allowance. I mowed lawns for the neighbors in the sweltering summer heat, raked endless piles of leaves in the freezing autumn wind, and hoarded the cash in a battered shoebox hidden under my bed. I did all of this to beg my parents for just one weekend trip to Disneyland. Just the 3 of us. I explicitly told them I did not want any presents for Christmas, And I did not want anything for my upcoming birthday. I just wanted 48 hours where I was the absolute center of their attention. A normal kid with normal parents doing a normal family activity without walking on eggshells. Miraculously, after weeks of relentless begging and presenting them with the cash I had saved to cover my own ticket, they agreed. The solid plan was to leave Preston with my grandparents for the weekend. I was so wildly excited I could not sleep for 3 solid days prior. I had the park map completely memorized. I knew exactly which rides we would go on first, where we would eat, and what time the parade started. The morning we were supposed to pack the car and leave, Preston found the printed hotel confirmations sitting on the kitchen counter. He completely lost his mind. It was a level of psychotic rage I had rarely seen even from him. He threw heavy ceramic plates across the kitchen, shattering them into dangerous shards against the drywall. He cornered me near the refrigerator, his face violently red and contorted with fury, and screamed, "I will kill you if you try to steal my parents from me. You think you are better than me? I will kill you." I was absolutely terrified. He was 15, much larger and stronger than me, and given the total lack of boundaries in our home, I genuinely did not know what he was capable of doing to me in my sleep. I looked over at my parents, my heart pounding violently in my chest, fully expecting them to finally draw a hard line, to call off his bluff, to call the police if they had to protect their younger son. Instead, my mother looked at me with pleading, desperate, watery eyes. "Julian, please, just let him come in the car. It is the absolute only way to calm him down. We will still have fun, I promise. Just be the bigger person. We cannot deal with an episode right now." Caved. The expert guilt-tripping worked perfectly on my vulnerable 13-year-old brain. As you can probably guess, the trip was a total, unmitigated nightmare. Preston refused to ride a single roller coaster because they made him dizzy. He complained bitterly about the California heat. He fake cried about the noise of the crowds, and he spent the entire 12 hours in the park clinging to my mother's arm, demanding her undivided attention. We spent most of the day sitting on shaded benches near the restrooms while my dad bought him ridiculously overpriced churros and souvenirs to keep his violent tantrums at bay. I walked a few paces behind them the entire day, a silent, heartbroken ghost trailing a supposedly happy family of 3. That was the exact, defining moment something inside my chest shattered permanently. The illusion of family evaporated in the California heat. I stopped seeing my parents as my protectors. I started seeing them as my wardens, and Preston as their warden. By the time I reached high school, I had emotionally and mentally detached from my family entirely. I treated my house like a hostile boarding facility where I only slept and ate. I focused entirely on my grades, my SAT prep, and my future escape route. But Preston's toxic behavior was rapidly escalating beyond the safe, enabling walls of our house. He never had any friends, and he started lashing out at the neighborhood kids. My parents were constantly doing exhausting damage control, apologizing profusely to angry parents at HOA meetings, and secretly paying for broken windows or stolen bicycles to avoid police involvement. During my junior year, I spent 3 grueling months building a complex robotics project for the state science fair. It was my golden ticket to a potential full-ride engineering scholarship. I poured my soul, my sweat, and my sleepless nights into that machine. The night before the fair, I left it on the dining room table to grab a quick glass of water from the kitchen. When I came back, the robot was smashed into dozens of jagged, irreparable pieces on the hardwood floor. Wires were ripped out, gears were crushed. Preston was standing directly over it, holding my dad's heavy metal hammer, breathing heavily. He looked me dead in the eye, dropping the hammer, and smiled a sickening, victorious smile. I completely lost my temper. The years of suppressed rage boiled over. I dropped my glass, lunged forward, and shoved him hard against the wall. It was the very first time in my entire life I had ever physically fought back. My father came running in from the garage, saw Preston sliding down the wall acting like a fragile, frightened victim clutching his shoulder, and immediately grabbed me by the back of my collar. He did not ask what happened. He did not look at my destroyed months of hard work scattered on the rug. He yelled at me for being a violent, ungrateful son and grounded me for a month. Why do you always have to show off and make him feel bad about himself? You know he struggles with his academics. You did this just to rub his face in it, my dad roared, his spit hitting my face. My mother did not say a single word to comfort me. She did not ask about the scholarship. She just walked over, grabbed a heavy-duty black trash bag, and swept the broken pieces of my future into the garbage like it was common household dust. That night, I sat in the pitch black of my room and made a solemn, unbreakable vow. I was going to leave this house the exact second the clock struck midnight on my 18th birthday, and I was going to secure my own college fund to make it happen. My grandpa Walter and grandma Evelyn had set up a dedicated college savings account for me when I was a baby. I had seen the bank statements a few years ago. I knew it had at least $25,000 in it. More than enough to get me out of the state, secure a dorm room, and start my new life free of their tyranny. A few weeks later, I was looking for some old tax documents in my dad's home office to fill out my early financial aid applications. I opened the bottom drawer of his locked filing cabinet, which he had accidentally left open, and found a thick, unmarked manila folder. Inside were official legal documents, court summons, and bank statements. I started reading, and the blood rapidly drained from my face, leaving me dizzy and violently nauseous. Preston had severely assaulted a teenager 2 streets over. The boy had required dozens of stitches and extensive dental work to reconstruct his jaw. The family had hired a ruthless lawyer and threatened to press criminal charges and drag my parents into a brutal, highly publicized liability lawsuit that would have ruined their reputation and sent Preston to a juvenile detention center. To keep the family quiet and avoid a permanent criminal record for their precious golden boy, my parents had paid them a massive settlement out of court. And they used my college fund to do it. Every single penny. Gone. The money my grandparents had lovingly saved for my future, the safety net I was entirely relying on to escape this hellhole, had been completely drained and transferred to a victim's family to buy Preston's freedom. They had essentially stolen my future to protect his present. I sat on the cold floor of that office, clutching the bank statements in my shaking hands, trembling with a rage so cold it felt like liquid nitrogen in my veins. I did not scream. I did not cry. Crying was for people who still had hope that things could change. I carefully put the papers back exactly as I found them, sliding the drawer shut to erase any evidence that I had been there. I knew right then and there that I was entirely, fundamentally on my own. My parents were not just passive enablers, they were active thieves. I used to think the worst part of my life was the physical bullying from Preston. I was about to find out that the emotional betrayal from the people who were supposed to love me goes much, much deeper. And the confrontation that was about to happen at the Thanksgiving table would change the trajectory of my life forever. The tension in the house was utterly suffocating leading up to the Thanksgiving dinner of my senior year. I had spent the last several months moving in total, calculated silence, secretly applying to universities on the absolute opposite side of the country. I applied for every single grant, every academic scholarship, and every high-interest student loan I could find on the internet. I took a grueling part-time job stocking heavy shelves at a local hardware store after school, hiding my cash earnings deep inside the lining of my mattress where my mother wouldn't find it when she inevitably snooped in my room to do laundry. We were sitting around the formal dining table. The Thanksgiving turkey was carved, the gravy was hot, and my mother was busy fawning over Preston, making sure he got all the dark meat he preferred, completely ignoring the fact that my plate was empty. I gripped the edge of the mahogany table, took a deep, steadying breath, and set my fork down. The metallic clink echoed sharply in the quiet room, cutting through the sound of Preston chewing with his mouth open. I got accepted into the advanced engineering program at the State University on the East Coast, I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of any emotion. It is 3,000 miles away. I have secured partial funding through student loans, and I am moving out immediately after graduation next spring. My mother froze. A spoonful of mashed potatoes hovered mid-air, trembling slightly in her hand. My father slowly put his napkin down on the table, his face instantly darkening into a familiar scowl. The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a butcher knife. "Why on earth would you want to go so far away?" my mother asked, her voice tight, already rising in that familiar, hysterical pitch she used to manipulate situations. "You have perfectly fine community colleges right here in town. What is wrong with staying close to home? Your family is here. We need you here." "I want to experience something different," I replied smoothly, refusing to break eye contact with her. "It is a top-tier program. It is the best possible move for my career and my future." My dad scoffed loudly, leaning forward aggressively, pointing a greasy, accusatory finger at me across the turkey. "You are not going anywhere, Julian. Preston needs you here. You know how incredibly hard things are for him in the real world. You cannot just pack up your bags and abandon him like that. It is incredibly selfish, even for you." I looked at my father, studying the absolute, terrifying conviction in his eyes. He truly, deeply believed I owed my entire existence to a brother who terrorized me daily. He thought I was property. "I am not responsible for Preston," I stated clearly, my voice finally carrying a sharp edge of steel. "He is your son. I need to live my own life." That is when the conversation took a catastrophic turn that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. My father, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple with frustration and rage at my sudden defiance, slammed his heavy fist on the table, rattling the fine china and spilling a glass of water, and blurted out the ugly, unspoken truth of my existence. "We had you so that Preston would always have someone to take care of him." The words hung in the air like toxic, suffocating gas. The room suddenly felt like it was spinning violently on an axis. I stared at him, my stomach dropping into an endless, terrifying void. I wasn't a son. I was an insurance policy, a biological safety net bred strictly for utility. My mother gasped loudly, dropping her spoon onto her plate with a loud clatter, realizing exactly what he had just confessed. She immediately reached across the table, her hands grasping at the air, trying desperately to backtrack and soften the fatal blow. "Julian, honey, he does not mean it like that. Of course we love you. You are an important part of the family plan. We are a team, Julian. Families stick together." Part of the family plan, a backup plan, a designated, unpaid, lifelong caretaker, an organ donor of time, money, and sanity for their defective, abusive golden child. I did not yell. I did not flip the table or throw my glass against the wall, even though every cell in my body wanted to. The absolute, blinding clarity of the moment washed over me, instantly freezing any remaining drop of affection, guilt, or loyalty I had for these people. I stood up slowly, pushed my chair back so hard it tipped over onto the rug with a thud, and walked upstairs without uttering a single word. The day after I officially graduated high school and turned 18, I packed a single beat-up duffel bag. I left my childhood trophies, my books, and anything they had ever bought me. My parents stood in the hallway, trying to threaten me into submission. My mother cried loud, fake tears, wailing about how I was breaking her heart, while my father screamed that they would cut me off financially, refused to co-sign any student loans, drain my savings, and remove me from their health insurance policies immediately. It was almost comical, considering they had already stolen my inheritance and my college fund to pay for Preston's violent crimes. I looked at them one last time, taking in the pathetic sight of the people who were supposed to protect me, walked out the front door into the cool evening air, and did not look back. I walked 5 miles in the dark to my Grandpa Walter and Grandma Evelyn's house. They were the only sane, grounded people in my entire bloodline. When I knocked on their door at 11 p.m. and told them exactly what happened at that Thanksgiving dinner, and what I had found in the filing cabinet, Grandma Evelyn openly wept, holding my face in her soft hands. Grandpa Walter, a tough, retired mechanic who had seen a lot of hard things in his life, pulled me into a tight, bone-crushing embrace. "You owe them absolutely nothing, Julian," my grandfather told me, his voice rough and thick with emotion. "They made their sick choices. They chose to sacrifice one son for the other. You go chase your dreams, and do not ever, for 1 second, feel guilty for surviving a burning house. They let me stay in their spare room for the summer. Before I left for the East Coast, they handed me a pristine white envelope containing $5,000 they had secretly saved up outside of my stolen fund, hiding it from my father in a safety deposit box. It was enough to buy a cheap, reliable used car, pay for gas, and get me across the country to my university dorm. College was a brutal, unforgiving awakening. Without a parental safety net, without a 401k to fall back on or a wealthy family to call when my bank account hit zero, I was entirely on my own in a sea of privileged kids whose biggest worry was what frat party to attend. I took a grueling job working the graveyard shift at a 24-hour diner near campus. I would attend intense engineering and business lectures during the day, study in the library until my eyes burned and blurred, and then serve greasy pancakes and scrub sticky floors until 4 a.m. There were nights I was so utterly exhausted my hands shook uncontrollably holding a coffee pot, and I survived on cheap instant ramen, black coffee, and sheer, unadulterated spite. But for the first time in my life I was free. Nobody was screaming at me. Nobody was breaking my things. I breathed air that did not smell like anxiety and impending violence. During my sophomore year, struggling to stay awake in a complex macroeconomics class, I met Fiona. She was brilliant, fiercely loyal, and she saw right through my heavily guarded, defensive exterior. We became best friends, sharing expensive textbooks to save money. She was the first person outside of my grandparents who knew the agonizing truth about my family. She helped me navigate the impossibly complex world of student loans, credit building, and real estate investment clubs on campus. I was building a titanium armor around myself, piece by piece, dollar by dollar. But the dark shadows of my past were still lurking across the country, festering in that toxic house, just waiting for the perfect moment to drag me back into the abyss. I thought distance was enough to protect me. I was about to learn a very hard, very expensive lesson about blood ties and the lengths desperate people will go to when they run out of options. 6 years passed. 6 long, grueling years of absolute, undisturbed silence from my parents. They did not call when I graduated at the very top of my engineering class with high honors. They did not call on my birthdays, on major holidays, or during the brutal winter of my junior year when I caught severe pneumonia and was hospitalized for a week, lying in a hospital bed completely alone. They made their stance painfully, abundantly clear. If I was not actively playing my assigned, subservient role as Preston's lifelong caretaker and financial sponsor, I was entirely dead to them. And honestly, that was perfectly fine with me. I thrived in the vacuum of their absence. Without their constant weight dragging me down, I learned how to sprint. Immediately after graduation, I partnered up with a brilliant tech developer named Dominic, whom I had met through a highly competitive university networking event. Dominic was a genius with code, and I had a mind for business strategy and operations. We shared the same relentless hunger to prove ourselves. Together, we launched a software startup focused on automated logistics and supply chain efficiency for major retail corporations. I poured every single ounce of my trauma-fueled work ethic into the company. We worked 100-hour weeks, sleeping under our cramped office desks, eating cold pizza, and pitching to venture capital investors until our voices went completely hoarse. Within 3 short years, our proprietary software aggressively disrupted the market. We caught the eye of a massive supply chain conglomerate, and after months of grueling negotiations, our startup was acquired. We expertly negotiated to keep the management rights, our executive titles, and a massive equity stake. The buyout made us wealthy beyond my wildest, most desperate childhood dreams. We were talking 8-figure payouts. But instead of buying flashy sports cars or renting penthouses to show off on the internet, I took my massive payout and invested it heavily into commercial real estate and diverse index funds. By the time I was 27, I was the CEO of our newly formed tech holding company, and we had just finalized the purchase of a stunning, 10-story glass office building right in the heart of the city's financial district. Despite my massive, life-altering success, I kept my digital footprint completely scrubbed and locked down. If you searched my name on Google, you would find a generic, boring LinkedIn profile with no profile picture, listing me simply as a project consultant. I wanted no flashy lifestyle photos on social media, no public bragging about my salary, my stock options, or my rapidly growing real estate portfolio. I preferred the quiet, untouchable power of stealth wealth. I knew, deep in my bones, that if my parents ever caught wind of my financial status, they would swarm like a plague of locusts. I kept in regular, loving contact with Grandma Evelyn and Grandpa Walter. I discreetly paid off the remaining balance of their mortgage through an anonymous trust, and I made sure they had the absolute best premium medical care money could buy. Through Grandma Evelyn's weekly phone calls, I received sporadic, grim updates about the chaotic, deteriorating situation back in my hometown. Preston's toxic, violent behavior had spiraled completely out of control without me there to act as his emotional punching bag. He was now in his early 30s, chronically unemployed, and still living in my parents' basement playing video games. But his aggression had bled out into the street. He had started aggressively harassing the neighbors, specifically targeting a sweet woman named Clara and her young children. It escalated to the point where the local HOA meetings were entirely dedicated to his terrifying menace. Eventually, Officer Hayes, a veteran local cop who had known my family's dark secrets for years, caught Preston throwing heavy, jagged rocks at Clara's toddlers in their own driveway. Preston was immediately arrested on multiple charges, including assault and child endangerment. My parents were hit with massive legal fees, court-mandated therapy bills, and the crushing reality of a potential felony criminal record that would guarantee Preston never got a job in his life. They were drowning in massive debt, desperately taking out a second mortgage on their house just to keep him out of a county jail cell. When my grandmother told me this over the phone, I felt a brief, fleeting flicker of pity, but it was quickly, ruthlessly extinguished by the cold memory of my stolen college fund. It was their mess. They created the monster by refusing to discipline him. Now they had to feed it or let it destroy them. I thought I was completely insulated from their chaos. My financial and geographical fortress felt impenetrable. But I deeply underestimated the sheer greed and treachery of extended family. Aunt Beatrice, my father's sister, had always been a nosy, gossiping opportunist who lived for drama. She visited my grandparents one sunny afternoon under the fake guise of bringing them a homemade pie. While Grandma Evelyn was in the kitchen making tea, Beatrice snooped through the personal mail on the living room counter. She found a private holiday card I had sent my grandparents, which unfortunately had my new corporate headquarters return address printed in tiny letters on the envelope. She took a picture of it with her smartphone. And like the loyal, greedy traitor she was, she sold that information directly to my father, likely in exchange for a promised cut of whatever money they thought they could extort from me once they tracked me down. A week later, my private burner phone, the one specific, unlisted number I kept active solely for my grandparents' emergencies, rang. I looked at the screen and saw a local hometown area code. Against my better judgment, my morbid curiosity got the better of me. I answered. Julian. It was my father. His voice sounded older, incredibly haggard, but it still carried that exact same undertone of arrogant entitlement that made my skin crawl. I sat back in my plush leather office chair, staring out at the sprawling city skyline from my top-floor office. I gripped the armrest until my knuckles turned white. What do you want, Richard? Is that how you speak to the man who raised you? He snapped, old toxic habits dying hard. He quickly caught himself, clearing his throat loudly, and forced a sickeningly sweet, manipulative tone. Listen, son. Your mother and I miss you terribly. We want to put the past behind us and heal. Things have been really hard here. Your brother Preston is in some serious legal trouble. We had to hire a defense lawyer, Mr. Henderson, but the bills are piling up faster than we can pay. We heard through the grapevine you have a decent corporate job out there in the city. It is time you step up, act like a man, and help your family out of this bind. My blood ran ice cold, but my voice remained perfectly, terrifyingly steady. I am not paying a single dime for Preston's crimes. You stole my college fund for him once. Never, ever call this number again. I hung up immediately and blocked the number. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from raw adrenaline. But they were not done. A few days later, a thick, certified letter arrived at my corporate headquarters front desk. It was from Mr. Henderson, their sleazy, ambulance-chasing lawyer. It was a thinly veiled threat, citing obscure family support laws and implying that if I did not voluntarily contribute a large six-figure sum to my brother's medical and legal welfare, they would file a massive public lawsuit to garnish my salary. They explicitly threatened to cause a massive scene at my workplace to shame me in front of my bosses and colleagues. They were trying to scare a mid-level employee into submission. They thought the threat of corporate embarrassment and losing my job would force me to open my checkbook and surrender my hard-earned money. I looked at the legal letter sitting on my expansive mahogany desk, feeling the familiar, suffocating weight of their manipulation trying to pull me back down into their swamp. But I wasn't the scared, helpless 13-year-old boy crying in Disneyland anymore. I was a man who owned the very ground they were threatening to stand on. I thought the worst was over. I thought the letter was their final, pathetic play. I was so incredibly wrong. The real storm was just about to break through my front glass doors, and I was going to make sure they drowned in it. It was a completely ordinary Tuesday morning, precisely at 10 o'clock, when the toxic ghosts of my traumatic past finally decided to smash their way through the front glass doors of my carefully constructed present reality. I was sitting at my expansive mahogany desk in my top-floor corner office, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The morning sun was reflecting off the surrounding skyscrapers, casting a warm, golden glow over the financial district. I was holding a cup of premium dark roast coffee, thoroughly reviewing a massive, highly complex commercial real estate acquisition file for a new tech campus we were planning to build in Austin, Texas. My mind was entirely focused on profit margins, zoning laws, and municipal tax incentives. I felt completely insulated. I felt safe. I had spent 6 years building an impenetrable financial and physical fortress around myself, brick by agonizing brick. Then the private, unlisted intercom line on my desk buzzed. It was a sharp, intrusive sound that immediately pulled me out of my deep focus. I pressed the flashing button. It was Marcus, my head of corporate building security. Marcus was a highly decorated former military police officer, a man who rarely ever lost his professional composure. But this time, his voice was unusually tight, carrying a strange mixture of professional restraint and blatant, utter confusion. He told me there was a rapidly escalating situation down in the main lobby. An older, visibly agitated couple and a younger man aggressively claiming to be a high-powered defense lawyer were currently causing a massive, unhinged public disturbance. They were screaming my full legal name. They were aggressively demanding to see my direct manager, my department head, or whoever was in charge of my employment. They were loudly threatening to file a devastating, highly publicized lawsuit against the entire company if I was not immediately brought down to the lobby to answer for my so-called family financial obligations. Hearing those words, a strange sensation washed over me. I did not panic. I did not feel my chest tighten. I did not feel that old, familiar childhood terror gripping my throat, the kind that used to paralyze me whenever my brother Preston entered the room. Instead, a wave of profound, icy, absolute calm washed over every single nerve in my body. The moment I had subconsciously been preparing for over the last 6 years had finally arrived. I stood up slowly from my leather executive chair. I carefully buttoned my custom-tailored navy blue suit jacket. I checked my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window, making sure my posture was flawless. My tie was perfectly straight, and my expression was utterly unreadable. I walked out of my office, gave my executive assistant a brief nod to hold all my upcoming calls, and walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway toward the private executive elevator. I swiped my secure access card, and the heavy metal doors slid open. As the digital display ticked down from the 10th floor to the ground level, I took a deep, steadying breath. I mentally prepared myself to finally face the exact same people who had brazenly stolen my college fund, who had willingly destroyed my youth, and who had treated my very existence as nothing more than a biological insurance policy designed to serve a violent bully. I thought about the thousands of hours I had spent working the graveyard shift at that greasy diner, scrubbing floors with blistered hands just to pay my rent, while they sat in their comfortable suburban home pretending I did not exist. The elevator descended smoothly, but my mind was racing through a Rolodex of painful memories, locking each one away into a vault of cold, hard logic. The elevator chimed softly. The polished steel doors slid open, revealing the sprawling, sunlit expanse of our main corporate lobby. The floors were imported, polished Italian marble that gleamed under the modern recessed lighting. The walls were lined with expensive contemporary art pieces. And right in the center of this sophisticated, high-end professional space, the atmosphere was currently being completely poisoned by the shrill, hysterical, embarrassingly loud pitch of my mother's voice. There they were, Richard and Margaret. Seeing them in the flesh after 6 years was a surreal, jarring experience. They looked so much older, vastly more haggard, and completely consumed by the toxic stress they had deliberately cultivated for decades. My father was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit that looked like it had been pulled from the back of a dusty closet. His face was blotchy and red with righteous, unearned indignation. His fists clenched at his sides. My mother was clutching a faded designer handbag like it was a shield, her face twisted into a mask of aggressive victimhood. Beside them stood Mr. Henderson, the sleazy local defense lawyer they had presumably hired to keep Preston out of a county jail cell. He was clutching a battered, overstuffed leather briefcase, looking around the high-end lobby with a smug, predatory grin. He was clearly calculating how massive of a corporate settlement he could easily squeeze out of my supposedly terrified employer to avoid a public relations scandal. At least 50 of my employees, ranging from senior software engineers to marketing directors, were standing around the security turnstiles, holding their morning coffees, watching the bizarre, unprecedented spectacle unfold with wide eyes. I demand to speak to the head of human resources right this exact second, my mother shrieked at Marcus, the stoic security guard, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger directly in his face. My son, Julian, works in this building. He is legally and morally required to support his family. He is hiding a massive 6-figure salary from us while his own flesh and blood is facing a criminal lawsuit. Bring his manager down here immediately so we can serve these papers and garnish his wages. You cannot protect him from the law. I stepped fully out of the elevator bay and walked slowly, deliberately across the marble floor. My expensive leather dress shoes echoed sharply, cutting cleanly through the chaotic noise. The crowd of employees immediately parted for me like the Red Sea, nodding respectfully, murmuring quiet greetings. My parents, hearing the sudden shift in the room's energy, stopped yelling and turned around. For a split second, I saw genuine, unfiltered shock register on their aging faces. They were entirely expecting to see the hunched-over, terrified, easily manipulated 18-year-old boy they had thrown away like unwanted garbage 6 years ago. They expected to see a desperate, sweating mid-level employee terrified of losing his modest cubicle job. Instead, they were staring at a 28-year-old man who held himself with absolute, undeniable authority. Richard, Margaret, I said, keeping my voice perfectly flat, entirely devoid of any familial warmth or recognition. You are currently trespassing on private commercial real estate. You are disrupting a place of business. What exactly do you think you are doing here? My father quickly recovered from his initial shock, puffing out his chest, attempting to aggressively assert his old, toxic domestic dominance in a corporate setting. Do not speak to us with that disrespectful tone, Julian. We are your parents. We brought you into this world. We had to hire an expensive private investigator just to find this corporate address because you cowardly hid from us. Your brother Preston is facing a massive lawsuit and potential jail time because of a tragic misunderstanding with a neighbor. You have a moral and legal obligation to use your salary to help pay for his defense and his mandatory therapy. Mr. Henderson here has drafted the official paperwork. The lawyer stepped forward, puffing out his own chest, completely and utterly misreading the entire power dynamic of the room. Listen here, kid, Henderson said. using a deeply patronizing, aggressive tone meant to intimidate a junior, inexperienced employee. Under certain family support statutes and duty of care laws, we can make your life a living, breathing hell. We will sue you for financial abandonment. We will drag your name through the mud in the local press. We will contact your CEO, your board of directors, and your HR department. We will ensure you lose your precious promotion and your salary unless you sign this legally binding agreement today to allocate 50% of your monthly income to a trust fund dedicated solely to Preston. I looked down at the thick stack of legal documents he was aggressively waving in my face. It was, without a doubt, the most pathetic, legally baseless, and desperate extortion attempt I had ever witnessed in my entire professional career. They were entirely relying on the completely false assumption that I was a low-level worker terrified of a corporate scandal. They thought the mere threat of public embarrassment would force me to open my bank accounts and surrender my hard-earned wealth to them. "You want to speak to my manager?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet, allowing a heavy silence to fall over the lobby. "You want to speak to the person in charge of this entire operation, so you can get me fired and ruin my career?" "Absolutely," my mother yelled, crossing her arms over her chest, a triumphant, malicious, vindictive smirk spreading across her face. "We want the CEO down here right now. We want them to know exactly what kind of selfish, greedy, heartless monster they have working for them. We want them to know you stole from your own family by hiding your wealth when we were suffering." The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her accusing me of stealing wealth, after they had literally, physically drained my grandparents' college fund down to the last single cent to pay off Preston's previous assault victims, was almost poetic in its cruelty. They were completely blind to their own staggering hypocrisy. Right on cue, the heavy, frosted glass doors to the ground-floor executive boardroom opened, and my business partner, Dominic, walked out. Dominic was a self-made billionaire, a man whose fierce reputation in the global tech and real estate industry was legendary. He walked over to where we were standing, looking highly amused and slightly irritated by the circus unfolding in our pristine lobby. "Is there a problem down here, Julian?" Dominic asked smoothly, adjusting his expensive watch, glancing dismissively at the three intruders. My father instantly zeroed in on Dominic's expensive, custom-tailored Italian suit and his undeniable authoritative presence. He immediately assumed Dominic was the boss, the man who held my professional fate in his hands. Richard stepped forward eagerly, extending a sweaty hand, putting on his best fake, charming, salesman smile. "Sir, I assume you are the man running this company," my father said loudly, projecting his voice, ensuring the entire lobby of onlookers could hear his tragic performance. "I am Richard, Julian's father. I am deeply, profoundly sorry to bring our private family drama into your beautiful, prestigious building, but you absolutely need to know the ugly truth about your employee. Julian has completely abandoned his severely disabled brother. He is hoarding his salary, living a life of luxury, while his family is on the absolute brink of total financial ruin and a massive custody and liability lawsuit. We demand that you discipline him immediately. We demand that his wages be officially garnished to support our legal fees before this becomes a PR nightmare for your brand." Dominic did not reach out to shake my father's hand. He stood there, his hands casually tucked into the pockets of his trousers, and looked at my parents as if they were a disgusting, sticky stain on the polished marble floor. He then shifted his cold gaze to Mr. Henderson, who was nodding vigorously in agreement with my father, holding up his briefcase like a weapon. "Garnish his wages?" Dominic repeated slowly, a sharp, mocking, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. "Fire him? You want me to publicly discipline Julian?" "Yes, exactly. That is exactly what we want," my mother chimed in eagerly, her eyes gleaming with vindictive, toxic triumph, completely oblivious to the trap she was sprinting into. "He is an ungrateful, spoiled child. You need to hold him accountable. You need to make him pay what he owes us." Dominic turned his head slowly and looked directly at me. A highly entertained, razor-sharp smirk played on his face. The trap was fully set. The audience was watching. It was time to pull the lever. Dominic turned his attention back to my parents. The amused smirk vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of absolute, terrifying corporate authority. His voice, when he finally spoke, echoed clearly and sharply across the dead-silent lobby, slicing through my parents' toxic delusions like a scalpel. I think you three are severely, embarrassingly, and catastrophically mistaken about the power dynamic in this building, Dominic said, his tone dripping with absolute, unfiltered condescension. I am a minority shareholder and a strategic consulting partner. Julian is not my employee. Julian is the CEO of this entire tech conglomerate. He is the founder. He is the majority shareholder. Furthermore, Julian personally holds the deed to this commercial real estate property. He literally, legally owns the ground you are currently standing on. You are not threatening a mid-level manager who is afraid of HR. You are attempting to blackmail a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars. In his own building, surrounded by his own employees, in front of his own security team. The physical reaction was instantaneous, visceral, and incredibly, deeply satisfying to watch. The color completely, utterly drained from my father's face in a matter of seconds. He looked as though he had just been physically struck by a speeding freight train. He took a staggering, unsteady step backward, his eyes darting frantically around the massive, expensive lobby, his brain finally, desperately connecting the dots. He looked at the expensive modern artwork, he looked at the massive security team deferring entirely to my commands, and he looked at the sheer, overwhelming scale of the wealth surrounding him. My mother's jaw literally dropped open. The vindictive, triumphant smirk completely vanished, instantly replaced by a look of absolute, unadulterated horror and panicked realization. She looked at my perfectly tailored suit, the expensive, understated watch on my wrist, and the absolute, chilling lack of fear in my eyes. She finally realized that the boy she had bullied, neglected, and planned to use as a lifelong financial slave was now a king holding all the cards. Mr. Henderson, the sleazy lawyer who had been so arrogant and aggressive just 2 minutes prior, suddenly went a sickly shade of pale green. He looked down at the bogus, legally baseless documents trembling in his hands, realizing with absolute clarity that he had just attempted to extort a highly powerful, wealthy CEO in front of dozens of credible witnesses. He immediately began shoving the papers back into his battered leather briefcase, his hands visibly shaking, knowing his entire legal career, his license to practice law, and his financial future were now in serious, irreversible jeopardy. The silence in the lobby was absolutely deafening. You could hear a pin drop on the marble floor. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the physical distance between me and the people who had made my first 18 years a living, suffocating hell. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream, throw a tantrum, or break things like Preston always did. I used the cold, surgical, undeniable precision of facts, and it cut them deeper than any physical blow ever could. You brought a cheap, ambulance-chasing local lawyer to my corporate headquarters to threaten me with a completely baseless lawsuit over family support statutes that do not even apply in this state jurisdiction. I said, my voice echoing clearly, ensuring every single employee heard the truth. You thought you could intimidate me into paying for Preston's violent crimes. You thought you could scare me. Let me make my position abundantly crystal clear, Richard. I do not owe you a single fraction of a cent. I do not owe you a drop of my sweat. You completely forfeited any right to my salary, my wealth, my time, and my life the exact day you secretly drained my $25,000 college fund to pay off the family of the boy Preston violently assaulted. A collective gasp echoed from the crowd of my employees. My father flinched as if he had been slapped. My mother gasped loudly, taking a desperate step forward, her hands reaching out towards me in a pathetic, transparent attempt at maternal affection. Julian, please, sweetheart, you have to listen to me. That was in the past. We had no choice. You have to understand the pressure we were under. You have so much money now. Look at this place. Look at what you have built. You can easily afford to help us without even feeling it. Preston is your brother. He is your blood. He is going to go to jail. We are going to lose our house to pay these legal fees. Please, you are a good boy. You have to save us." "I do not have to do anything," I replied, my voice freezing the very air between us. "You actively chose to protect and enable a violent abuser. You actively chose to sacrifice my future, my education, and my safety to shield him from the legal consequences of his own actions. You sat at a Thanksgiving dinner table and explicitly told me I was nothing but a backup plan, a designated caretaker. Well, the backup plan permanently resigned 6 years ago. Your golden child is your problem, not my financial burden. I highly suggest you take whatever meager money you have left and find a significantly better defense attorney, because Mr. Henderson here looks like he is about to wet his pants and run for the hills." Henderson did not say a single word in his own defense. He was already backing away rapidly toward the revolving glass doors, completely abandoning his clients without a second thought. He knew when he was massively outgunned, and he wanted absolutely no part of the massive, devastating countersuit my elite corporate legal team would undoubtedly bury him under by the end of the business day. "You cannot do this to us," my father suddenly roared, his desperate panic turning back into that familiar, toxic, violent anger. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "We gave you life. You owe us everything. You are nothing without the foundation we gave you." I looked at Marcus, my head of security, who was standing a few feet away, his hand resting near his radio, waiting patiently for my signal. I gave him a subtle, definitive nod. "Marcus," I said calmly, projecting my voice, "please escort these 2 individuals off my commercial property immediately. If they ever set foot in this lobby again, if they linger in the parking garage, or if they attempt to contact any of my employees or partners, have them immediately arrested for criminal trespassing, corporate harassment, and attempted extortion." "Yes, sir." "With pleasure," Marcus replied smoothly. He and 3 other large, highly trained security guards stepped forward, forming a solid, impenetrable wall of muscle and dark suits between me and my parents. "Julian, no, you cannot abandon your family like this," my mother shrieked hysterically, tears streaming down her face, her voice cracking as the guards gently but firmly grabbed their arms and guided them backward toward the exit. "We are your parents. We love you. Please, just give us a chance." I turned my back on them without a single ounce of hesitation and walked toward the private elevator. I did not look over my shoulder. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt, remorse, or sadness. As the heavy elevator doors slid shut, permanently cutting off the sound of my mother's hysterical, fading wails, I felt a massive, invisible weight completely lift off my shoulders. The toxic chains that had bound me for my entire life were completely, permanently broken. I had finally, definitively won. The immediate fallout over the next few days was intensely predictable, pathetic, and highly documented. My burner phone exploded with hundreds of frantic, desperate text messages and voicemails. Now that Margaret and Richard knew definitively that I was a multimillionaire, their tactics shifted entirely from aggressive legal threats to pathetic, groveling, emotional manipulation. My mother sent me massive, rambling paragraphs detailing her supposedly failing health, talking about how she could not sleep, how my father was having severe chest pains from the stress of the impending lawsuit, and how a small, insignificant financial contribution from my vast real estate empire would literally save their lives. I did not reply to a single message. I simply archived the chats, taking screenshots, keeping a meticulous written record in case my lawyers needed to file a permanent, binding restraining order. Then came the inevitable flying monkeys. Aunt Beatrice, the greedy trader who had sold my corporate address to my father, tried to call my main office line posing as a potential investor looking to fund a startup. My executive assistants were already strictly briefed on the situation and blocked her number immediately. Then, my younger cousin Marcus, a naive 20-year-old who had been thoroughly and completely brainwashed by my mother's sobbing, victimized sob stories, started aggressively blowing up my private social media accounts. "How can you be so incredibly heartless and cruel, Julian?" Marcus wrote in a lengthy, unsolicited, highly emotional message. Your parents are literally losing their home to the bank. Preston is facing serious jail time and might be locked away. You are sitting in a luxury penthouse office making millions of dollars, and you will not even throw them a bone to keep them off the streets? You are a massive disappointment to this entire family. Blood is supposed to mean something. You should be ashamed of yourself. I decided to humor Marcus just this once, mainly to set the factual record straight so he could report back to the rest of the highly toxic extended family. I typed out a quick, clinical, utterly devastating response. Marcus, my parents explicitly stole my entire college fund, completely draining my grandparents' inheritance money to bail Preston out of a previous violent assault that he committed. They actively allowed him to physically and emotionally abuse me for 18 years without consequence. They explicitly told me my only purpose in life was to be his unpaid, lifelong caretaker. I am not a bank, and I am not their victim anymore. If you care so deeply and passionately about their financial ruin, I highly suggest you empty your own personal savings account to pay their lawyer. Do not ever contact me again. I blocked him immediately across all platforms. The silence that followed from the extended family was absolute, golden, and deeply peaceful. A week later, I flew first class back to my home state to visit Grandpa Walter and Grandma Evelyn. I wanted to see them in person, hug them, and assure them that the storm had been permanently handled. We sat in their cozy, familiar living room, drinking hot coffee, as I recounted the entire dramatic confrontation in the corporate lobby. Grandma Evelyn shook her head, tears of profound relief and deep sorrow in her eyes, mourning the complete moral collapse of her own son, but relieved that I was finally safe. But Grandpa Walter just smiled a deeply satisfied, fiercely proud smile. He reached across the wooden coffee table and squeezed my shoulder with his strong, calloused hand. You did exactly the right thing, Julian. You drew a hard, unbreakable line in the concrete. They thought they could bully the terrified boy, but they ran headfirst into the man. I am so incredibly proud of the life you have built from scratch. You never owed them your salary, you never owed them your youth, and you certainly never owed them your sanity. A full, peaceful year passed since the explosive confrontation in my corporate lobby. A year characterized by absolute peace, massive global business expansion, and profound, deep-rooted personal healing. My tech holding company acquired 3 more prime commercial real estate properties in major metropolitan areas, and my personal wealth grew exponentially. But while my life was ascending rapidly into the light, completely unburdened by the past, my parents' lives were violently, inevitably imploding into absolute, inescapable darkness. The final, devastating truth about my family dynamic was uncovered entirely by accident, during a strict, court-mandated evaluation. As part of Preston's criminal sentencing for the assault on the neighbor's toddlers, the presiding judge had ordered a comprehensive, highly detailed psychiatric assessment. The goal was to determine his mental competency to stand trial and to evaluate the absolute necessity of permanent adult guardianship. A highly specialized, no-nonsense state forensic therapist was assigned to the case. She was meticulous. She spent weeks digging deep into Preston's medical history, aggressively interviewing my parents separately, and analyzing decades of pediatric records, pharmacy receipts, and school reports. What she uncovered was a psychological horror story that completely shattered the fragile, enabling remains of my family, exposing a level of toxicity I hadn't even fully comprehended. Through my Grandma Evelyn, who was still unfortunately getting the agonizing, desperate updates from a completely devastated and broken Richard, I learned the terrifying truth. Margaret, my mother, was not just a passive enabler who turned a blind eye to Preston's violence. She was the active, deliberate architect of Preston's destruction. The forensic therapist discovered, through a glaring trail of medical inconsistencies, that for over 2 decades, Margaret had been secretly, intentionally tampering with Preston's prescribed ADHD and behavioral medications. She would routinely skip his essential doses, intentionally alter his prescriptions, and deliberately trigger his aggressive, violent episodes by feeding him immense amounts of sugar, caffeine, and highly toxic, anxiety-inducing narratives about the outside world. Why? The therapist's diagnosis was chilling. Margaret suffered from a severe, toxic need for absolute control and crippling dependency, a textbook case of Munchausen syndrome by proxy dynamics. She was absolutely terrified of the empty nest syndrome. She wanted to ensure, with absolute certainty, that Preston would never develop the social skills to live independently, never hold down a job, never get a promotion, never get married, and never ever leave her house. She intentionally kept him sick, volatile, and entirely, helplessly dependent on her to validate her own twisted, sick sense of maternal martyrdom. She expertly manipulated my father into funding this domestic nightmare, and she attempted to violently groom me into being the financial replacement when they eventually died. She literally poisoned her own son's mind so he would never leave her. The revelation was a massive, catastrophic earthquake. The state immediately and aggressively intervened. Margaret was permanently stripped of all legal custody and medical guardianship over Preston. Because of his extensive violent history, his complete lack of a stable home environment, and his newly discovered status as a victim of profound medical abuse, Preston was remanded to a highly secure, state-run residential psychiatric facility. He was finally locked away, placed under strict medical supervision, properly medicated, and completely removed from society. The fallout between my parents was apocalyptic. Richard, finally realizing that his wife had intentionally destroyed their son's mind and bankrupted their entire lives just to play the victim, filed for a highly contentious, incredibly bitter divorce. The divorce proceedings were brutal, public, and financially devastating. Without my stolen college fund to bail them out, and drowning in mountains of legal fees from the criminal lawsuit, the civil liability lawsuit from the neighbors, and the divorce lawyers, they completely ran out of money. The bank officially foreclosed on their house. The toxic museum where I had suffered in silence for 18 years was auctioned off by the bank to the highest bidder to satisfy their crushing debts. Richard ended up living in a cheap, run-down, rat-infested apartment on the industrial outskirts of town. His health was rapidly failing, his reputation in the community was in absolute ruins, and his pension was being garnished to pay legal debts. Margaret was living in a spare bedroom with a distant, begrudging relative, completely isolated, having lost her precious golden child, her enabling husband, her home, and her massive, delusion-fueled ego. One freezing evening in December, I was sitting in my luxury penthouse, looking over some architectural blueprints for a new development, when the lobby intercom buzzed loudly. My concierge informed me, with a tone of deep concern, that an unkempt man named Richard was sitting in the lobby, begging and pleading for just 5 minutes of my time. He had driven 3,000 miles across the country in a beat-up, failing sedan, sleeping in Walmart parking lots, just to find me. I did not go down to the lobby this time. I had nothing left to say to his face. I picked up the lobby phone, instructing the concierge to put him on the secure line. Julian. My father's voice cracked over the speaker. It was incredibly weak, trembling, completely stripped of all the toxic arrogance, entitlement, and fury that had defined his entire existence. Julian, please, I have nothing left. The divorce finalized. Margaret took whatever meager cash was left in the settlement. The house is completely gone. I am living in a slum. I have no heat. I know you have a massive real estate portfolio. Just one small apartment. Just a tiny, insignificant fraction of your salary to help me get back on my feet and buy groceries. I am your father. I am begging you. I made a mistake. I listened to his desperate, pathetic pleas, feeling the cold, smooth glass of my desk under my fingertips. I thought about the 10-year-old boy wiping chocolate off his face alone in his room. I thought about the stolen college fund. I thought about the fact that he only showed up, hat in hand, because he had completely, utterly run out of victims to bleed dry. He wasn't sorry for what he did to me. He was just sorry he had run out of money. Richard, I said, my voice empty of any anger, operating strictly on cold, unfeeling logic. You allowed a sick woman to mentally destroy one of your sons, and you actively allowed that son to physically terrorize the other. You explicitly stole my inheritance to cover up a violent crime to protect your own ego. You made your choices. You chose your team. I strongly suggest you look into state housing assistance and food stamps, because you will not see a single dime of my money. This is the absolute last time you will ever hear my voice." I hung up the phone. I called the concierge and instructed him to have security escort the man off the premises immediately and permanently ban him from the building. There was no grand screaming match. There was no dramatic movie ending where he fell to his knees in the rain. There was just a simple click of a phone, and a highly toxic man being escorted out into the cold city night, completely and permanently forgotten by the son he had tried to destroy. The villains of my story had not just been defeated. They had completely, systematically annihilated themselves. With the dark, suffocating chapter of my biological parents permanently closed and locked away, I poured my boundless, focused energy into the future I had violently fought to secure. My tech holding company continued its aggressive, wildly successful global expansion. Dominic and I secured massive, multimillion-dollar government contracts for our logistics software, and my commercial real estate portfolio doubled in value within 18 months. But the money, the titles, and the prestige were never the end goal. The wealth was simply the impenetrable, titanium fortress I had built to ensure that absolutely no one could ever victimize, manipulate, or control me again. My true, profound purpose shifted toward fiercely protecting and nurturing the only real family I had ever known. Grandpa Walter began having severe, life-threatening issues with his heart, requiring a highly complex, incredibly dangerous, and massively expensive bypass surgery. To make matters worse, their insurance company tried to deny the claim, tying it up in endless, cruel bureaucratic red tape. In the past, this would have destroyed my grandparents financially. They would have been forced to sell their beloved home, drain their tiny retirement fund, and go into massive debt just to cover the medical bills. Instead, I stepped in. I flew a top-tier, world-renowned team of private cardiovascular surgeons into the city. I paid for the entire staggering cost of the operation completely out of pocket without blinking an eye. I secured a luxury private recovery suite at the hospital, and I hired full-time, highly trained in-home nursing care for the entire 6 months following his discharge. I bought Grandma Evelyn a brand new, incredibly safe, and reliable SUV, so she wouldn't have to drive their rusted, unpredictable old truck to the pharmacy in the snow ever again. When Grandpa Walter finally woke up from the grueling surgery, looking pale and fragile but incredibly strong, I was sitting right next to his hospital bed, holding his hand. He looked around at the expensive medical equipment, the private nurses hovering nearby, and then at me. Hot tears pooled in his sharp, intelligent blue eyes. "You did not have to do all this, Julian," he whispered, his voice raspy and weak from the breathing tube. "This must have cost a fortune. You should be spending your money on yourself, traveling, enjoying your youth, not wasting it on an old man." I held his calloused hand tightly, the exact same hand that had handed me the envelope of cash that had literally saved my life 10 years ago when I walked out of that toxic house. "You gave me the foundation to build my entire life, Grandpa," I told him, meaning every single syllable from the absolute bottom of my heart. "Taking care of you and Grandma is not a burden. It is not an obligation. It is the greatest privilege of my wealth. You are my family." Once Grandpa Walter was fully recovered, walking around his garden and thriving at home, I finally took a massive step back from the grinding, relentless 100-hour work weeks. Dominic, noticing my exhaustion, insisted I take a massive, extended sabbatical. "You built the empire, Julian," he told me over expensive scotch one evening in his penthouse. "The engine is running perfectly. Now go actually live in the world you conquered." I took his advice. I packed a high-end, durable hiking backpack, completely disconnected my corporate email from my phone, handed the daily operations over to Dominic, and booked a one-way, first-class ticket to Europe. It was the exact trip I had dreamed of since I was a miserable, invisible teenager hiding in my bedroom, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on my ceiling. For 6 glorious months, I traveled entirely on my own terms. I did not have to accommodate anyone's violent tantrums. I did not have to walk on eggshells or shrink myself down to make someone else comfortable. I stood under the glittering, massive iron structure of the Eiffel Tower in Paris, breathing in the crisp night air, feeling a profound, overwhelming sense of total victory. I drank strong, dark espresso in small, sun-drenched cafes hidden in the winding, ancient streets of Rome, watching normal families interact, laughing and sharing food, and realizing that love is supposed to be nurturing, supportive, and kind, not extortionate and terrifying. I hiked the rugged, breathtaking, steep coastlines of the Amalfi Coast, pushing my body to the absolute limit, realizing exactly how incredibly strong I had become, both physically and mentally. Throughout that long, healing journey, sitting on trains looking out at the rolling European countryside, I spent a lot of time reflecting deeply on the profoundly flawed concept of bloodlines. Society constantly, relentlessly pushes the toxic narrative that family is absolutely everything, that you must always forgive and forget simply because you share DNA with your abusers. They tell you to attend the awkward Thanksgiving dinners, to show up to the funerals, to tolerate the profound disrespect and the manipulation because they are your parents and you only get one family. My brutal journey taught me the exact opposite. Blood is nothing more than a biological coincidence. It is an accident of birth. True family is built on mutual respect, unwavering loyalty, shared joy, and the absolute, non-negotiable refusal to exploit one another. My parents tried to turn me into a human sacrifice to manage their own profound, sickening failures. They thought my quiet silence was a sign of weakness. They thought my physical distance was just a temporary tantrum that they could eventually overcome with guilt. They learned, in the most brutal, permanent, financial, and legal terms possible, that my boundaries were made of reinforced titanium. I am 28 years old now. I am incredibly wealthy. I am completely, fiercely independent, and I am surrounded only by people who value my mind, my heart, and my spirit, not my financial utility. I no longer have cold sweat nightmares about Preston breaking my things. I no longer hear my father's toxic, booming voice in my head telling me I am just a backup plan. I am the sole author, the CEO, and the undeniable main character of my own life. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I know it was heavy, I know it was dark, and I know many of you watching right now might be dealing with your own incredibly toxic family dynamics, manipulative parents, or siblings who drain your life force on a daily basis. Please, I am begging you, take my story as undeniable, living proof that you are absolutely not obligated to set yourself on fire just to keep your abusers warm. You have the absolute, fundamental right to walk away, to fiercely protect your peace, and to build a beautiful, massive, successful life entirely without them. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard, unforgiving line in the sand and walk away from the people who were supposed to protect you? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And do not forget to like and subscribe so you do not miss the next journey. Stay strong, protect your boundaries at all costs, and I will see you in the next video.